At the very beginning of this adventurous and thrilling story, we are introduced to a young woman named Lucy. She is standing outside an enormous corporate building, accompanied by her friend. The atmosphere is tense, and there is a sense of anticipation in the air, as though something significant is about to happen. Lucy is not someone who leads an ordinary life. She has been involved in small-scale thefts and petty crimes to make ends meet. She operates in the shadows, taking risks to survive in a world where opportunities are scarce for people like her. Her friend, who is equally involved in illicit activities, is always looking for new ways to earn quick money, even if it means breaking the law. On this particular day, Lucy's friend presents her with a dangerous job. He hands her a mysterious suitcase and instructs her to deliver it to a powerful man named Mr. Zhang, who resides inside the building. In return for this seemingly simple delivery, they would receive a sum of $1,000. However, Lucy is immediately skeptical. She knows that tasks like these are never as simple as they seem. She questions her friend, expressing her concern about the risks involved. Walking into an unfamiliar corporate building with a suspicious suitcase could very well cost her life. The payment, according to her, is far too low for the dangers involved. At the very least, she argues, they should be receiving $10,000 instead of a mere $1,000. Seeing the potential danger, Lucy outright refuses to take on the task. She is unwilling to gamble with her life for such a small amount of money. However, her friend is not an easy person to argue with. He is cunning and knows exactly how to manipulate situations to his advantage. Without warning, he locks a handcuff around Lucy's wrist, attaching it directly to the suitcase. Now Lucy has no choice but to go through with the job. If she refuses, she will remain bound to the suitcase indefinitely. Her friend reassures her that all she has to do is walk inside, find Mr. Zhang, hand him the suitcase, and walk out. He makes it sound so simple, as though nothing could possibly go wrong. Left with no alternative, Lucy reluctantly steps inside the massive building. She walks towards the reception desk and inquires about Mr. Zhang, trying to remain calm despite the growing anxiety building inside her. However, just as she is scanning the area, she catches sight of her friend from outside. He is standing at a distance looking directly at her. Before she can react, a sudden gunshot rings through the air. Lucy watches in shock and horror as her friend collapses to the ground, lifeless. Someone has killed him. The realization of the situation crashes over her like a wave. She has walked straight into a trap. Before she can even scream, a group of armed agents swarm into the building. These are not ordinary security guards. Their movements are quick, precise, and merciless. Within moments, they seize Lucy and drag her away. She struggles, shouting for help, but her voice goes unheard. No one in the building reacts to her cries, as if this is an everyday occurrence here. As Lucy is forcibly taken into another room, it becomes clear that these men work for Mr. Zhang. The terrifying truth unfolds. Mr. Zhang himself ordered the execution of Lucy's friend. Mr. Zhang is not just any businessman. He is one of the most powerful and feared individuals in the underworld. He has committed countless illegal activities, from financial crimes to brutal murders, yet no evidence has ever surfaced against him. He operates from the shadows, ensuring that no one dares to cross him. Now Lucy is in his grasp. She is locked inside a dimly lit interrogation room, its walls cold and unwelcoming. After a few moments, the door opens and Mr. Zhang steps inside. His presence alone is enough to make the air feel heavy. He walks towards Lucy with slow, calculated steps, his sharp eyes scanning her with intense curiosity. Without wasting time, he speaks. "Tell me, what is inside the suitcase?" Lucy, still terrified and confused, stammers. "I don't know. I swear, I don't know. My friend gave it to me. He told me to deliver it to you. That's all I know." Mr. Zhang's expression changes slightly. He seems intrigued. Someone else had arranged for this suitcase to be delivered to him? But who? And why? Unwilling to take any chances, Mr. Zhang hands Lucy a small piece of paper. On it, a code is written. He steps back and gives her a command. "Enter this code. Open the suitcase. I need to see what's inside." Lucy stares at the suitcase, her hands trembling. She has no idea what awaits her inside. But one thing is certain, her life will never be the same again. At this moment, Lucy was more terrified than ever before. The horrifying realization dawned upon her. What if there was a bomb inside the suitcase? What if she was unknowingly holding a device meant to assassinate Mr. Zhang? Her mind raced with possibilities. Could her friend have set her up? Could this be an elaborate plan to get rid of both her and Mr. Zhang? Sensing her distress, Mr. Zhang remained eerily calm. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes locked onto her, and in a cold, matter-of-fact tone he spoke. Perhaps your friend did hide a bomb inside. Perhaps someone wants me dead. His voice sent chills down Lucy's spine. I can't do this. Lucy stammered, her breath quickening. Please let me go. I had no idea what was in this suitcase. I was just following orders. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Without hesitation, Mr. Zhang's agents raised their guns, all pointing directly at Lucy. The metallic clicks of their weapons echoed in the dimly lit room, signaling that there was no way out. She had no choice now. With trembling hands, Lucy reached for the small paper slip that Mr. Zhang had given her earlier. The code to open the suitcase was written on it. She hesitated for a second, her fingers hovering over the lock, but the threatening presence of the armed men forced her to proceed. With slow, deliberate movements, she entered the code. The lock snapped open, and the suitcase creaked as she lifted the lid. A shocking discovery. Not a bomb, but something far worse. Lucy gasped. Inside the suitcase were 4 blue-colored packets, neatly stacked and sealed. At first glance, they didn't look like much, just ordinary plastic pouches. But as soon as Mr. Zhang and his men caught sight of them, a strange tension filled the air. This was not money. This was not a bomb. It was something else, something dangerous. Mr. Zhang stepped forward, his brows furrowing as he carefully examined the mysterious packets. What the hell is this? He muttered under his breath. One of his men, who had extensive knowledge of illicit substances, inspected the packets closely. His eyes widened in shock. Sir, these are no ordinary drugs. This is something else entirely. The chemical composition is completely unknown. Curiosity piqued, Mr. Zhang decided to test the substance. He called for one of his men, a low-level worker who followed orders blindly. The poor man stepped forward, completely unaware of what awaited him. Take this, Mr. Zhang ordered, handing him a small portion of the strange blue powder. Consume it. The man hesitated, but ultimately obeyed. He placed the substance in his mouth and swallowed. For a few seconds, nothing happened. And then, the nightmare began. A drug unlike any other. The horror unfolds. The man suddenly gasped for air, his body convulsing violently. His eyes turned bloodshot, and his veins bulged unnaturally, as if something was crawling beneath his skin. He let out a guttural scream, a sound so inhuman that Lucy froze in terror. His body jerked uncontrollably, and his breathing became ragged. A few moments later, he turned his gaze toward Lucy, but his stare was not normal anymore. His eyes were filled with an eerie, predatory hunger. Lucy recoiled. Something was horribly wrong. Mr. Zhang, too, watched the scene unfold with increasing concern. This was not an ordinary reaction to drugs. This was something else entirely. The man lunged forward, as if driven by some primal instinct to attack Lucy. A gunshot echoed in the room. Lucy screamed as the man collapsed to the floor, lifeless. A bullet hole in his forehead, blood pooling around his body. Mr. Zhang had shot him. The room fell into dead silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was trying to process what just happened. Mr. Zhang slowly lowered his gun, his face devoid of any emotion. His mind was racing, trying to understand what kind of substance he was dealing with. Finally, he turned to Lucy. His cold, piercing eyes met hers. I have an important job for you, he said, his voice calm but filled with unspoken menace. And if you accept, it could be beneficial to you. Lucy immediately realized the danger she was in. Whatever this was, it was not just about drugs or money anymore. This was something bigger, something far more dangerous. Her breathing quickened, and she shook her head in desperation. No, I don't want to be involved in this. Please, just let me go. But Mr. Zhang was not a man who took no for an answer. One of his men stepped forward, without warning, and punched Lucy hard in the face. Darkness consumed her vision. She felt herself falling. Everything went black. Meanwhile, a new scene unfolds in a prestigious university. The screen fades to black, and the story shifts to a grand lecture hall in a prestigious university. Inside, a professor is giving a speech to an audience of scholars and students. The professor, a man of great intellect, is passionately discussing the development of human intelligence and evolution. Every living creature on this planet, he declares, only uses a fraction of its brain's potential. Most species use just 1% of their cognitive abilities. He gestures towards a large digital screen behind him, displaying various charts and scientific data. But imagine, he continues, what would happen if a being, any living organism, could unlock more than just that 1%? What if it could access 10%, 20%, 50%? The crowd listens in rapt attention, unaware of the dark connection this lecture has to the events unfolding elsewhere. What does this have to do with Lucy? How does this mysterious blue drug tie into the professor's theories? And most importantly, what is Lucy about to wake up to? In the Grand University Lecture Hall, the professor continued his thought-provoking speech, his voice filled with passion and intrigue. As humans, we pride ourselves on intelligence, he said, pacing across the stage. Unlike other species, we have evolved to use approximately 10% of our brain's total capacity. This has allowed us to develop language, culture, and technology, things that no other creature on Earth has achieved. The audience listened intently, but a few skeptics in the room exchanged doubtful glances. The professor smirked knowingly, as if anticipating their disbelief. He clicked a button on his remote, and a new slide appeared on the large digital screen behind him, displaying a brain scan of a dolphin. But did you know that dolphins, yes, the ones swimming in our oceans, are actually using 20% of their brain capacity? That means they may possess cognitive abilities far beyond what we currently understand. Their communication skills, problem-solving abilities, and even their emotional intelligence surpass many of our own. Gasps and murmurs spread across the room. A student, clearly intrigued, raised his hand. Professor, if dolphins are already more advanced than us in some ways, does that mean humans could also evolve to use more of their brain? What would happen if someone managed to unlock, say, 40% of their brain's potential? The professor nodded approvingly at the question and replied, now this is where things get fascinating. If a human could access 40% of their brain's capacity, they might develop abilities that seem almost supernatural. Imagine being able to read other people's thoughts, or even control their minds. The room went silent, the weight of his words settling upon them. Another student, clearly skeptical but curious, asked, and what if someone were to unlock 100%? The professor paused, a serious expression crossing his face. For the first time, there was uncertainty in his voice. If a human were to reach 100%, I truly have no idea what would happen. Perhaps they would transcend physical limitations altogether. Perhaps they would become something entirely new. But one thing is certain, such a transformation would change the very nature of what it means to be human. As the lecture continued, the scene faded to black, and suddenly, we were back with Lucy. Lucy awakens, a horrifying discovery. Lucy's eyes fluttered open, and immediately, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She winced, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Her vision blurred, and she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the sight of medical equipment all around her sent a chill down her spine. She was in a medical facility. But why? Her breathing quickened as she slowly pulled herself up and looked down at her stomach. There was a fresh wound, a stitched-up incision running across her lower abdomen. Panic surged through her. Oh my God! Did they take my organs? Her mind reeled with terror. Had she been drugged and used for organ trafficking? Before she could process further, a group of men entered the room, their presence dominating the space. They walked straight toward her, grabbed her arms, and forcibly dragged her forward. Let me go! Lucy screamed, struggling against their iron grip. They didn't listen. They didn't speak. They simply dragged her down the dimly lit corridor, until they finally threw her onto the cold floor in front of a familiar figure. Mr. Zhang. He sat there, calm and collected, staring at her as if she were nothing more than a pawn in his game. Lucy shook with fear, her stomach aching with every movement. She was sure they had stolen something from her. But before she could voice her fears, a doctor entered the room. Calm down, he said, adjusting his gloves. We haven't taken anything from you. Lucy stared at him, confused. The doctor smirked. On the contrary, we've put something inside you. Her blood ran cold. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The doctor gestured toward her stomach. We've implanted something inside your body. Something valuable. Something powerful. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. The blue substance. The drug. It's inside you now. Her eyes widened in horror. The same drug that had driven that man insane. The same drug that had gotten him killed. It was inside her body, and she had no idea what it was going to do to her. The others. She's not alone. Just when Lucy thought things couldn't get worse, she heard muffled voices and distant cries. She turned her head and saw them. Dozens of other people sitting in the same medical room, their expressions mirroring her own fear and confusion. Each of them had the same stitched-up wound on their stomachs. Each of them had the blue drug inside them. She wasn't the only one. They were all part of something bigger, something that was about to change them all forever. Lucy had never felt pain like this before. She lay on the cold floor, her vision fading in and out, her body racked with agony. The man had beaten her mercilessly. Each punch to her stomach had sent shockwaves of pain throughout her entire body. And then, something horrifying happened. The blue drug packets inside her stomach burst. For a few agonizing seconds, Lucy thought she was dying. A burning sensation spread through her veins, crawling up her spine like wildfire. She gasped, her eyes widening in terror as she felt something shifting inside her. Like her entire body was being rewritten at the molecular level. The pain should have been unbearable, but then it wasn't. Something snapped inside her mind. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate steadied. And then clarity. Lucy's vision sharpened to an inhuman level. Every tiny detail in the dimly lit room suddenly crystal clear. She could hear everything. The rustling of fabric, the shallow breaths of the men in the room, even the faint hum of the building's electricity. Her body, once weak and trembling, now felt strong, unstoppable. Lucy slowly sat up. The men in the room were laughing, unaware of the monster they had just created. One of them approached her, sneering as he grabbed her arm. But this time, Lucy didn't flinch. She moved faster than she thought possible, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with inhuman strength. There was a sickening snap. The man screamed. The laughter stopped. Before the others could react, Lucy moved. She launched herself forward, dodging a punch with effortless precision, and grabbed a gun off the nearest table. And then she pulled the trigger. One by one, they fell. Lucy didn't even blink. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't human anymore. No more pain. No more fear. Lucy sat down at the table, calmly eating food, while the bodies around her lay motionless. She had just killed them all, without hesitation. Something inside her had changed. Something was missing. Pain, fear, emotion. Even when a stray bullet struck her shoulder, Lucy simply looked down at the wound with mild curiosity. She reached up, plucked the bullet out with her fingers, and tossed it aside like it was nothing. Her body was regenerating, healing faster than should have been possible. This was no ordinary drug. Breaking free, the hospital incident. Lucy quickly grabbed a jacket, covered herself, and walked out of the building. She needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening to her. She stole a motorcycle, moving through the city streets with precision and ease, as if she had been riding for years. Within minutes, she arrived at a hospital. Lucy walked past security unnoticed, her movements so controlled, so calculated, that no one questioned her presence. She entered an operating room, where doctors were working on a patient. She scanned the medical reports, her brain processing information at lightning speed. A tumor. Malignant. The patient had less than a month to live. She knew exactly what was wrong, just by looking at him. Her mind was evolving. She had become something else, something beyond human. And she was just getting started. Lucy had no hesitation. With deadly precision, she pulled out her gun and fired a single shot straight into the patient's head. The entire operating room fell silent. The doctors stood frozen, their faces pale with shock and horror. Lucy's voice was calm, emotionless. This man was going to die anyway. I just made your job easier. But the real question was, how did she know that? The blue drug's effect. A mind beyond human. The answer was simple. The blue drug that had burst inside her body was rewriting her brain. Her mind, once operating at a normal human level, had now reached 20% capacity, something no human had ever achieved before. She could sense everything. The faintest vibrations in the air, the rhythm of the doctor's heartbeats, the shifting molecules in the room. She could see beyond sight. She could control every cell in her body. She was evolving, and she had no time to waste. Surgery without anesthesia. Lucy turned her gun toward the doctors. The doctors hesitated. What was she asking? Lucy pressed the gun closer. Now, take the rest of the drugs out of me. They had no choice. With shaking hands, they began the surgery. No anesthesia. No painkillers. She didn't even flinch. As the scalpel sliced into her flesh, she simply watched. She felt every incision, every movement inside her body. And yet, there was no pain. Instead, she was fascinated. A goodbye to the past. As the doctors worked, Lucy dialed a number. Her voice was soft, almost human again. "Mom, I could feel everything." She closed her eyes. "I can hear the air moving, the water flowing. I remember every moment of my childhood, every word you ever said to me. I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Then, without waiting for a reply, she hung up. She knew she wouldn't see her mother again. Lucy's next move, no more mercy. The doctors finally removed the drugs from her stomach. They expected her to collapse. They expected her to weaken. She stood up, stronger, sharper, because it wasn't the drugs that made her powerful anymore. It was her mind. And now, there was only one thing left to do. She was going to kill Mr. Zhang. She was going to slaughter every last one of them. Nothing could stop her. Lucy now stood directly in front of Mr. Zhang, who was lounging comfortably, completely unaware of the storm about to hit him. Without hesitation, Lucy grabbed two sharp knives and swiftly struck his hands, causing him to writhe in pain. She leaned in closer, her voice laced with a chilling calmness, and demanded, "Where have you sent all those people who, just like me, had those dangerous drugs implanted inside their bodies?" Mr. Zhang, despite his pain, smirked arrogantly. "You'll never find out," he spat. But before he could utter another word, Lucy placed her hand firmly on his head. The moment her skin touched his, a rush of information flooded into her mind. It was as if she was reading his thoughts, extracting every hidden detail buried deep in his consciousness. Zhang's secrets were no longer safe. Lucy's newfound abilities, a result of the blue drug coursing through her veins, allowed her to surpass the limitations of the human brain. She was no longer an ordinary person. She was evolving at an alarming rate. As her mind processed all the information extracted from Zhang, Lucy knew exactly where those helpless people had been sent for delivery. With her mission clear, she left Zhang writhing in pain and made her way to an old friend's house. This friend was a tech expert, someone who could help her track down digital traces and provide crucial information. However, Lucy no longer needed anyone's assistance. The moment she got her hands on a laptop, her fingers moved with an inhuman speed across the keyboard. A task that once took her hours to figure out now seemed effortless. Despite never having been adept with technology, she was now navigating complex systems, hacking into secured networks, and gathering classified information as if it were second nature. The evolution of her brain had reached a level beyond comprehension. She was absorbing and processing data faster than any artificial intelligence in existence. As she dug deeper into the information, she came across a name that caught her attention: Professor Samuel. He had spent years researching the capabilities of the human brain, investigating the theoretical limits of human intelligence. Lucy instantly realized that his studies aligned perfectly with what she was experiencing. Her abilities were growing exponentially, and she needed answers. Determined to learn more, Lucy read through all of Professor Samuel's research in mere minutes. Every complex formula, every neurological theory, and every psychological study he had ever conducted now existed within her mind as if she had studied them for decades. Without hesitation, she reached for the phone and dialed his number. When Professor Samuel answered, he was met with an eerie yet composed voice. "I have read all of your research, Professor," Lucy said, "and I can confirm that everything you have hypothesized is correct. I now understand the full extent of the human brain's capabilities." Samuel was taken aback. It was impossible for anyone to comprehend his work so quickly. He had spent years on these theories, years of trial and error, countless experiments, and deep study. "That's not possible," he muttered. "No one can grasp all of that information in such a short time." Lucy smirked. "Oh, but I have." And then, right before his eyes, something impossible happened. His television screen flickered, and suddenly, Lucy's face appeared on the monitor without any external device connecting them. Samuel's eyes widened in shock. "What? How are you doing that?" "I am no longer bound by the limitations of human capability," Lucy explained, her voice eerily calm. "Right now, I am using only 28% of my brain's potential. At this rate, I can manipulate technology, control electronic devices, and access any digital system at will." Samuel was speechless. His years of research had only been theoretical. But Lucy was living proof that his theories were real. If what you're saying is true, then you are the most advanced being on this planet, he said, almost in a whisper. Lucy took a deep breath. And my abilities are still evolving. Lucy wasted no time. She urgently told Professor Samuel, I need to meet you as soon as possible. I need to figure out what's happening to me and what I should do about it. The urgency in her voice made Samuel's pulse quicken. He responded without hesitation, Come to me immediately. Within moments, Lucy disguised herself and arrived at the airport. But as she stood in the bustling terminal, her enhanced mind processed an overwhelming amount of information at once. She suddenly realized something crucial. The other victims, the ones who still had the same dangerous drug inside their bodies, were also traveling via planes being transported across borders. Without wasting another second, Lucy used her abilities to contact the airport police. There are individuals in this airport carrying illegal drugs inside their bodies, she informed them, her voice commanding and unwavering. They need to be arrested immediately. When the officers hesitated, Lucy didn't wait for them to act on blind trust. Instead, she tapped into their systems, hacked into their communication network, and sent them clear, undeniable proof, detailed photos of the suspects, along with their precise locations in the airport. Within moments, law enforcement officers moved in, successfully detaining the individuals before they could board their flights. Meanwhile, Lucy, now free of that immediate threat, boarded her own plane. But something was happening, something she hadn't expected. She had now unlocked 40% of her brain's potential, and her body was beginning to destabilize. Her physical form started disintegrating. Tiny particles of dust and sand began detaching from her skin, as if she were dissolving into the air itself. Panic surged through her as she rushed to the airplane restroom, locking herself inside. Desperately, she rummaged through her bag, pulling out the remaining supply of drugs. Without thinking, she consumed them, hoping they would stabilize her somehow. But instead, she blacked out. The screen of reality faded to black. When Lucy regained consciousness, she wasn't on the plane anymore. She was in a hospital. As she opened her eyes, she immediately realized something new. She could now use 50% of her brain's capacity. Her abilities had advanced to a whole new level. She was no longer just enhanced. She was evolving beyond human limitations. Just then, a police inspector and his team arrived, having been ordered to keep her under surveillance. But they weren't just watching her. They suspected that Lucy was a walking weapon, perhaps even carrying explosives inside her body. The moment she stepped out of the hospital room, the inspector pointed his gun at her. But Lucy wasn't afraid. She simply flicked her fingers ever so slightly. In an instant, the entire team of officers collapsed unconscious. Their minds had been overridden. Lucy had disabled them without even touching them. Professor Samuel had once hypothesized that if a human could unlock 40% of their brain's potential, they would be able to control others. Lucy had now reached 50%. The power she wielded was beyond comprehension. Turning to the inspector, the only one still conscious, she spoke calmly. Take me to the 3 individuals who were arrested at the airport. Now, the inspector, completely under her influence, obeyed without hesitation. He drove her to the secure facility where the drug mules were being held. Inside, surgeons were preparing to remove the lethal substances from their bodies. As Lucy waited outside the operating rooms, she suddenly became aware of something extraordinary. She could hear everything, not just the murmurs of doctors and officers, but the private phone calls of every single citizen within range. Their conversations, their text messages, the very signals in the air, she was processing all of it simultaneously. Her mind had surpassed the limits of technology itself. And then she caught something alarming. Mr. Zhang's men had arrived. They were already inside the hospital, likely planning to retrieve the drugs from the captives before they were extracted surgically. Lucy didn't wait. She turned to the inspector and motioned for him to follow her inside. As soon as they stepped in, Zhang's men revealed their weapons and opened fire. But Lucy was beyond their reach. With just a thought, she seized control of their firearms, making them hover in the air before sending them clattering to the floor. The armed men looked at her in terror as she, with another flick of her hand, sent them flying backward, slamming into the walls as if an invisible force had struck them. One by one they fell. Without even touching them, Lucy had taken them down. Once the chaos settled, Lucy walked toward a suitcase sitting in the corner of the room. She knew what was inside. Packets of the same deadly blue drug that had transformed her. She picked it up and turned to the inspector. Take these, she ordered. They belong to the authorities now. As she handed over the drugs, she added, and come with me. There's something more we need to do. The inspector, still reeling from the extraordinary things he had just witnessed, hesitated for a moment before saying, I don't think you need me anymore. You can do things no one else can. Why would you want me around? Lucy, her expression calm, yet unwavering, replied, I don't need you, Inspector. But I want you with me. I want you as a reminder. Someone who keeps me connected to what I once was. Her words carried weight. The inspector, despite his doubts, nodded. Without another word, he got into the car with Lucy, and together they left, heading toward Professor Samuel's research facility. Meanwhile, Mr. Zhang had spotted Lucy leaving the hospital. His fury boiled over. The drugs were gone, his men had failed, and now, this woman, this impossible woman, was walking away, untouched and undefeated. He could not allow this. With an enraged command, he summoned his most elite fighters, the best assassins he had under his control. Find her. Kill her. Now. As Lucy and the inspector drove toward their destination, Professor Samuel was already preparing for their arrival. He had called together some of the greatest minds in neuroscience, physics, and philosophy. He wanted them all to meet Lucy, to witness the phenomenon she had become. When Lucy arrived, she wasted no time. She stood before them, her presence radiating an almost unnatural intensity, and began sharing her experiences. She described in intricate detail how her mind had expanded, how she could now manipulate matter, control technology, and even perceive time in ways no human ever had before. Most of the professors and scientists listened in stunned silence, their minds struggling to comprehend what they were hearing. But one among them was skeptical. This is impossible, he scoffed. What you're saying defies every scientific principle we know. There is no way a human brain can do what you claim. Lucy turned to him, her gaze steady. Without a word, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. A second later, she spoke. 20 years ago, you lost your 6-year-old daughter in a car accident. You never told anyone the full truth about what happened. You buried your grief inside yourself, never speaking of it again. The professor froze. His face went pale. His lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. Because everything she had just said was true, and no one else had ever known, the room fell into an eerie silence as the weight of the moment settled over them all. One by one, the other scientists and doctors began to believe. Lucy continued explaining, describing in even greater detail what happened when a human brain unlocked more of its potential. Her mind was now so advanced that she could reshape her own body. She demonstrated this by transforming her hand, stretching it, reshaping her fingers into different forms, into claws, into tendrils, into entirely new appendages. She could manipulate her very structure at will. She extended her arms outward, and in an instant, she had more than 2 hands. Then 3, then 4, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate her. She was beyond human. Then, she turned to the group and made a statement that sent shockwaves through the room. Mathematics and numbers are an illusion. The professors exchanged glances, confused. Lucy continued, humans created math as a way to understand the universe. But in reality, numbers don't exist. They're just a construct, a tool you use to make sense of things that are beyond your comprehension. Professor Samuel, always a rational thinker, challenged her. But if there were no mathematics, how would calculations work? How would anything be measured? How would the universe function? Lucy smiled. She walked toward the center of the room and gave them an example. Imagine a car driving in circles. At first, you can see it moving, but as its speed increases, it starts to blur. And if it moves fast enough, at an infinite speed, it vanishes. But the truth is, the car hasn't disappeared. It's still moving in the same loop. It's just happening so quickly that your perception can't grasp it anymore. She paused, letting the idea sink in before delivering the revelation. Everything, matter, time, space, it's all interconnected. The only thing that truly exists is time. Time shapes everything. It dictates evolution, existence, and decay. The room was utterly silent. The greatest scientific minds of their generation stood before her, utterly shaken. They had dedicated their lives to knowledge, but what Lucy was saying, what she was proving, was beyond anything they had ever considered. And just as they were beginning to grasp the full weight of her words, the doors burst open. Mr. Zhang's assassins had arrived. As Lucy stood in the middle of the laboratory, she could feel the air around her growing heavier with tension. Outside, Mr. Zhang's men had already surrounded the facility from all sides, their presence a deadly shadow looming over everything. These were not just ordinary henchmen. They were highly trained assassins, and their sole purpose at this moment was to eliminate Lucy at any cost. They had come armed with the most advanced weapons, ensuring that no one could stand in their way. The sound of boots stomping on the ground, the clanking of metal as they cocked their guns, and the hushed but firm orders passing between them created an atmosphere of impending chaos. Inside, the inspector, standing beside Lucy, observed the situation with growing concern. He turned to her, his voice firm but laced with urgency. "Lucy, they're coming in fast. We don't have much time left." He had seen many dangerous scenarios in his life, but nothing could compare to what was unfolding in front of him now. Lucy, however, was calm, almost unnervingly so. Her mind was working at an accelerated pace, processing every possible outcome in mere milliseconds. She turned towards Professor Samuel and his team of scientists, her expression resolute. "Inject the remaining doses of the drug into my body," she commanded, her voice carrying a sense of finality. The room fell in a stunned silence for a moment. The scientists exchanged nervous glances, unable to comprehend what she was asking them to do. Professor Samuel, the man whose research had been the foundation of all of this, stepped forward, his expression filled with concern. "Lucy," he began cautiously, "if we inject the remaining drugs, your survival rate will be reduced to 0. Your body won't be able to handle it." Lucy gave him a small, knowing smile. "I've known that from the very beginning," she said softly, but with conviction. "I was never meant to survive this. But if I can use this power to create something that will benefit humanity for centuries to come, then my existence will have had a purpose." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. There was no time for arguments. The professor hesitated only for a moment before nodding. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared the final doses. The other scientists, though filled with unease, followed suit. One by one, the injections were administered into Lucy's bloodstream. The transformation was immediate. The moment the last drop of the drug entered her veins, a surge of unimaginable energy coursed through her body. The very fabric of her being began to shift, transcending human limitations. She was now using 70% of her brain's capacity, a state never achieved by any human in history. Around her, the world was changing. The metals within the laboratory began to vibrate, pulling towards her, as if drawn by an invisible force. The energy she was emanating started condensing into an inky, swirling black matter, spreading outward like tendrils of pure creation. It moved with purpose, forming something vast and incomprehensible, a supercomputer, one that would store all of her knowledge, her experiences, and the data of the universe itself. As the process continued, her consciousness expanded beyond the physical realm. Her perception of time fractured and stretched. The limitations of the present moment disappeared. She could see everything, every detail of the past, every possibility of the future. The drug had amplified her abilities beyond the realm of human comprehension. With her brain now operating at 80%, her body began to dissolve, merging with the black matter. She was no longer bound by flesh and bone. She was becoming something more, something infinite. As her mind continued evolving, she discovered something extraordinary. Time travel was no longer just a theory. It was a reality she could control. With nothing but a thought, she moved through time itself. In an instant, she was no longer in the present. She had traveled to the past. As she drifted through history, witnessing the birth and decay of civilizations, she realized the true nature of existence. Time was not a linear construct, but an infinite loop, a constant cycle of cause and effect. Everything that had ever happened, everything that would ever happen, it all existed at once, layered upon itself like the pages of a book. And Lucy, now freed from the constraints of humanity, had become something more than a person. She had become knowledge itself. As Lucy continued her journey through time, she found herself in an era where human civilization did not yet exist. The Earth was a vastly different place, untamed and ruled by colossal creatures. The age of the dinosaurs. Towering ferns swayed in the prehistoric winds, the ground trembled under the footsteps of behemoth-like reptiles, and the sky was painted with the wings of gigantic flying creatures. It was a world untouched by human influence, a world where survival was dictated solely by nature's merciless rules. As she stood in the middle of this lost world, a massive theropod, one of the fiercest carnivores of its time, locked eyes with her. Its primal instincts immediately registered her as either a threat or prey. With a deafening roar, it charged toward her, its razor-sharp teeth gleaming under the prehistoric sun. But just as it lunged, Lucy, unaffected by fear, simply willed herself to move through time once more. In the blink of an eye, she vanished from that moment, leaving the charging beast to snap at empty air. Now, she found herself in yet another era, but this time, the landscape was vastly different. The world had changed, evolved. No longer was it dominated by gigantic reptiles. Instead, before her stood a primitive ancestor of humankind, an ape-like creature, its fur-covered body hunched as it cautiously examined its surroundings. This was the beginning of human evolution, the moment when early primates were slowly, over thousands of years, developing into the intelligent beings that would one day dominate the planet. Lucy watched in fascination as this early creature fumbled with a rock, unknowingly taking its first step toward toolmaking. She now understood that this was the crucial period where humanity was born, where the slow and gradual process of evolution began to shape what would eventually become civilization. Despite this revelation, she also realized just how long it had taken for the human brain to evolve to even a mere 10% of its full capacity. It had taken millions of years for early humans to advance, to discover fire, to create tools to build societies. And yet, here she was, having unlocked a level of intelligence far beyond what even modern humans could comprehend. Her brain was now operating at 99% capacity, and with it came an unimaginable power, the ability to witness the very fabric of the universe unfolding before her. At this stage, Lucy was no longer just a person. She had become something far greater. She could see the intricate process through which the universe had come into existence. The swirling chaos of cosmic gases condensing into galaxies, the birth of stars, the violent collisions that created planets. She understood the delicate balance that governed reality itself. It was as though she had ascended beyond mere mortality, reaching a level of understanding that was once only attributed to gods. She was witnessing the birth and death of celestial bodies as though they were mere flickering flames. The concept of time had become meaningless to her. It was no longer a linear path, but an endless loop of creation and destruction. Yet, even as she existed in this transcendent state, the world she had left behind was still in motion. Back in the laboratory, where her physical body was approaching its final transformation, Mr. Jang had entered. His presence was ominous, his face twisted with determination and fury. He had come with one sole purpose, to end Lucy. Without hesitation, he raised his gun and pointed it directly at her. But before he could pull the trigger, something happened. Lucy, having now reached 100% brain capacity, had shed her physical form entirely. In an instant, her body vanished, dissolving into the infinite void. The space she once occupied was now empty. Mr. Jang, confused and enraged, had no time to react before the inspector, his instincts sharper than ever, raised his own gun and fired. The bullet struck true, and in mere seconds, Mr. Jang fell lifeless to the ground. But Lucy was no longer there to witness it. She had transcended. From the black matter she had created, something materialized. An object, small yet holding an unfathomable amount of knowledge. A simple pen drive, containing all the data, experiences, and understanding she had gathered. This was the final step in her journey, the creation of something that would outlive her, something that could push humanity forward in ways they could never have imagined. She had no need for words, but she left behind a message nonetheless. She sent it to the inspector's phone, a simple yet profound statement. "I am everywhere." With those words, she confirmed what had happened. She was no longer bound to a physical body. She was no longer constrained by time, space, or reality. She had become something omnipresent, capable of existing in every place, every moment. She could move between dimensions, travel across the universe at will. She had merged with the very fabric of existence itself. In the end, as the world continued moving forward, one undeniable truth remained. Since the dawn of civilization, humanity had possessed the most powerful computer in existence, their own minds. Yet, instead of unlocking its true potential, they had limited themselves, chasing wealth, power, and personal gain. Only a rare few had ever dared to think beyond their own survival, to push the boundaries of what was possible. Lucy had done what no one else had. She had sacrificed herself not for personal power, but to leave behind something greater. And with that, her story came to an end. Or perhaps it was only the beginning.